Welcome to Volleyball State, your look at volleyball in 6 rotations. Here are your hosts, Jeff Sheldon and Lincoln Arneal.
Hello and welcome to Volleyball State, a look at the sport of volleyball in 6 rotations and a proud part of the Hurrdat Sports family. I'm Jeff Sheldon.
And I'm Lincoln Arneal.
Hey, we got a full show for you this week. Nebraska has now won 25 straight matches after the Huskers knock off Wisconsin. We're going to break down Nebraska's second sweep of the season against the Badgers. We're also going to preview what has become the Big Ten championship match. Coming up this week, Nebraska goes on the road to Happy Valley and will play their old rivals, Penn State. Plus, we take a big picture look at the sport and some possible seeding ramifications with Dan Gilman of the 6 Rotations podcast and AVCA content creator, all that and so much more. Lincoln Arneal, first of all, tell us all of the places in the internet diaspora that people can find us. It just keeps growing. There's a new platform every week.
We are pretty much wherever you like the social media for the most part. We are there. You can follow Volleyball Pod. They are there. We have accounts on Twitter, on Blue Sky, on TikTok. I also post a lot on my own personal account, Lincoln_VB on Twitter, Lincoln VB elsewhere. I write articles for Huskers Illustrated. I put out a weekly Substack, create some YouTube videos after every match. So you want volleyball content, you're in the right place because we put out so much. And
we haven't launched a Truth Social volleyball account, but
we're working on that. And plus, we also got to hang out last night. We were at the Wisconsin match, first match we've been to together as a co-host partnership. So that was a fun time.
Shout outs to Nebraska media relations contact Nate Poland for letting me come to the match and sticking me right next to Lincoln so we could kibitz about the match as it was happening. Also got to sit next to Dennis Punzel of the Wisconsin State Journal, a very nice man who is Wisconsin's longtime beat writer. So we had the full brain trust up there at the Devaney Center.
Yeah, that was fun. You also saved Dennis Punzel's computer charger, so he'll get that back in the mail this week. But
I thought he might have been going back up to write his story. I should have brought it down. That was just me being lazy. But Dennis, I hope you get your computer charger back.
Yep, but we got a full show, like you mentioned. We will start off in a rotation 1. We're talking about the big match of the week, Nebraska versus Wisconsin. Rotation 2 will have a very quick side-out rotation of Nebraska versus Iowa. Rotation 3 will look at the landscape of the Big Ten entering the final week and who's doing big things and wrapping up their season on strong and who's just ready for it to be over. Rotation 4, we'll take a look on the national landscape. Rotation 5, we welcome Daniel Gilman of 6 rotations. This is very weird, kind of very meta, 6 rotations into 5th rotation. Daniel Gilman with our interview of the week. And then on rotation 6, we will close up, as always, by looking at the week ahead of matches at Penn State and at Maryland. The end of the regular season is here.
That's right. And the reason that Nebraska-Penn State becomes the Big Ten championship match is because Nebraska, for the second time this season, takes down Wisconsin in 3 sets. It's our rotation 1. Huskers, for the second time this year, sweep the Badgers, this time in Lincoln, 25-21, 25-22, 25-17. Nebraska, for the longest time, could not get the monkey off their back against Wisconsin. They go 6-0 in sets against the Badgers. I suppose there's always the chance for these two teams again to meet in the postseason in the next month. But that would be pretty late in the tournament. And Lincoln, you put it in the tweet about your game story. Kind of the story on this was Nebraska ran off long serving runs early in each of the 3 sets to kind of put Wisconsin on their heels. Wisconsin never got comfortable in this match, never really put the pressure on Nebraska where Nebraska was chasing points. The latest point, we talked about this last night right after the match, the latest point in any set on Saturday that Wisconsin held a lead was 5-4. And that was in game 3. Yeah. So it was always, 17-15 Nebraska, 22-20 Nebraska. Wisconsin never made Nebraska, chase this match. And instead, Nebraska was the one putting Wisconsin on their heels with strong serving runs. And that, to me, was kind of the story of the match.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Nebraska never they were out of control, even though early on they took early leads in the second and third sets, but Nebraska again had those big runs. Wisconsin did tie up the third set at 14-14, but Nebraska answered. I mean, that was after an 8-3 run. I mean, Wisconsin needed a big run like that just to tie it up. So Nebraska was never always in control, and you really felt that from the get-go. The crowd was amped, the crowd was excited. They were they were feeling themselves because Nebraska football had won, so a lot of them had come from that or come from watching that, so they were riding high.
This was the second since Devaney was reconfigured for volleyball back in 2013, 2014. This was the second largest crowd at Devaney to see volleyball, second only to the Wisconsin match last year. It was just over 9,000 on Saturday night.
Yeah.
And it was the most people I had seen in a Devaney Center match for volleyball, since it's been reconfigured. There were a couple times back in, I think, like 2008, 2009, when they would play UCLA and Illinois and Devaney when it was still in the basketball configuration and it seated more people. But if you looked up at standing room only on Saturday night, there was too deep in some spots at standing room. It was jam-packed to the rafters, literally. And what they saw was, Nebraska put their foot down from the service line. Merritt Beeson, who had been struggling over the last couple weeks, didn't hit a super high percentage on Saturday, but she did have a match high 11 kills. Rebecca Alec, she had 6 kills in game one, ended up with 10 kills on 12 swings, just one error. And a lot of those were putting down overpasses or getting sort of off-speed shots or tips to fall, which had to be very frustrating to Wisconsin. And the other thing that really stuck out to me when I was looking back over the match was Wisconsin pulled almost even at the end of games 1 and 2. It was very tight into the 20s. And then Wisconsin would make a critical mistake, usually from the service line. This was a really rough night from the service line for Wisconsin. They committed 11 service errors in 3 sets. A couple of those, at least 3 that I can think of, came after the set had reached 20s in game 1 and 2. And that just, again, when Wisconsin had maybe Nebraska nearly within their grasp, they fumbled it away.
Yeah, for sure. We go play by play a little bit too, but it was just a great match for Nebraska. Offensively wasn't cleanest, but got the job done. But defensively, this was just typical. It wasn't typical, but it was Nebraska at their finest with defense too. Nebraska finished with they had 54 digs, which was the most Wisconsin against a Wisconsin opponent had any year in 3 sets. So 17 more digs than Wisconsin too. Lexi Rodriguez was the anchor, 16 digs from her. And they just, the block was great. I guess we can get into the play-by-play, but Nebraska, Franklin had a kill first round of the match. Nebraska ran off 7 straight points. 3 consecutive of those points were blocks. Andy Jackson, Merritt Beeson teamed up to block Sarah Franklin. Then Andy Jackson had a solo block against Carter Booth. And then Merritt Beeson had a solo block against Franklin as well, too. And that just it blew the roof off. And it just set the tone that, Nebraska didn't have, they had 4 blocks in the match after that.
Yeah.
It was so early, but still, they got a lot of touches. And I think they just took the confidence out of Wisconsin's hitters.
Yeah. I think to me, what it looked like as well was Wisconsin has an excellent freshman setter, Charlie Furbringer, who is going to be really, really good eventually. To me, it looked like a freshman playing in a match on the road in front of a really loud, raucous crowd. I don't think Charlie Furbringer, if you asked her today, would say that she had the greatest match on Saturday night. Wisconsin, they're always going to be more pin heavy than Nebraska, but they didn't get their middles involved until way too late. And I didn't think Wisconsin passed poorly at all. I thought Wisconsin actually held up really well. Even though Nebraska served a lot of runs, Wisconsin's serve receive game was pretty good. We talked about this last week, I believe, too, but Wisconsin's regular libero freshman Lola Schumacher was out last week with a concussion. She was out again on Saturday. Wisconsin was also missing their top DS in Golce Guchtikin. And so they had a new DS. They had a new libero, Sage Damcrow, another freshman. And Nebraska very clearly made it their plan to pick on her in serve receive and see how well she could hold up. Well, she held up pretty good. Wisconsin passed pretty well, but then it was the second contact. A lot of times I felt like that let Wisconsin down. And more as the match went on, they kept going to Sarah Franklin, who is just asked to carry such a big load for Wisconsin. She finished the match with 10 kills on 40 swings. She had 5 kills in game 1. So only 5 kills for the National Player of the Year in games 2 and 3. And in the two matches against Nebraska this year, Franklin hit 184 in Madison and 175 in Lincoln. So Nebraska really made Wisconsin uncomfortable and could not go to their Terminator to take over the match.
For sure, yeah. You mentioned, Dan Rowe was targeted 37 times out of Nebraska's 68 serves. Didn't give up any aces. The only ace came again was credited to Julio Orzo, who I think Merritt Beeson went short on her and she couldn't get up to it. So.
No, remember, that was the play where she tried to get out of the way on a hard flat serve and couldn't, and everyone was yelling out, and it like skipped off her shoulder. So that was the one ace that Wisconsin gave up.
She tried to matrix it and did not do it well. So I mean, Dambro, she got everything up, but the passing was suspect at times too. So I mean, Nebraska wasn't serving bullets back there, but they got the job done. Only missed four.
Yeah, you know what they didn't do? They didn't serve out 11 times. That's what they did.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get into play-by-play. We've already kind of dipped our toe in that as well too, but we've kind of mentioned first set. Franklin gets that first kill. Nebraska runs off 7 points in a row. Wisconsin burns their first time out. Devaney Center's going nuts. But I think after that, Wisconsin really settled into they get a little 4-0 run to get it back 10-7, so it's within the margin of error. And they got within 2 points. I mean, they had 3 straight points later in the match with CeCe Crawford back serving. Kind of 3 straight Nebraska errors too. I mean, Landfare tipped wide, and then back-to-back blocks on Merritt Beeson. That puts it 20-18. The teams trade side out from there until, again, 23-21. Service error, Wisconsin. Damro serves it out, and then Landfare gives Nebraska. Landfare comes back with the set point after that.
Yeah, Wisconsin hits under 200 in game 1, and if it wasn't for that 7-0 run to put Nebraska up 7-1, that set is there for the taking for Wisconsin. They get it back within 2, but as we'll see again in game 2, critical service errors late in the set give Nebraska a little bit of a cushion.
Should mention Rodriguez served that 7-0 run in the first set because it was a different server each of the sets too. So Rodriguez owned the 7-0 run in the first set.
That's right. We mentioned her earlier, 6 kills in game 1 for Rebecca Alec. We did not see that coming with Alec being the leader in game 1, but Merritt Beeson also 5 kills. So you knew right away that, you were going to probably have a good Merritt Beeson match. She finishes with a match high 11 kills. Let's move on to game 2. It was Merritt Beeson at the service line for the big run early in the second set for the Huskers. Merritt runs off 6 straight points. Taylor Landfare, she had a big match in Madison. I think she had 13 kills, and Nebraska's went up there. Had another good match, not a huge highlight match, but game 2 is where she stood out. And then a stretch in game 3 that we'll get to. She had 4 kills in game 2. 3 of them for Taylor Landfare came in the second half of the set after we reached 15. So she took over late. And then, once we got into the 20s, Wisconsin was right there, but it was service errors from their freshman setter, Charlie Furbringer, their DS, who has been playing for Golche Gutchtikin over the last week, Carly Anderson. Those two, I believe, combined for, it was Damro and Anderson combined for 7 of Wisconsin's 11 service errors. Furbringer and Anderson serve out late in game 2. Taylor Landfare gets the final kill to put it away for Nebraska, 25-22. And the Huskers go into the locker room up 2-0 on Wisconsin.
Yeah. Another key point in this one, it looked like Wisconsin had tied it up 19-19, but it was Landfare had hit a hard attack. It was called out. Nebraska challenged. They get the tip call too. So Nebraska goes from a potentially tied 19-19 to up 20-18. And that kind
it was the only challenge that Nebraska won on the night as well. They were 1 for 2 on their 1 for 3. They went 1 and 2 on challenges, and that's something you don't rarely see. Usually John Cook and his staff and the team that tells him when to challenge are pretty accurate. And for whatever reason, the officials just did not see what Nebraska saw when they were challenging in this match. It doesn't come back to bite Nebraska, but something to note that usually they're pretty good on challenges, especially at home, and went 1 for 2 or 1 for 3 on Saturday night.
Yeah, this was Andy Jackson had 3 kills during the 6-0 run during this too. I mean, kind of a quiet night from her. She got blocked a lot, just was a little off. She had 7 kills, 6 air. Three of those kills came during that 6-0 run during this. But so
Jackson's got to be disciplined against a team like Wisconsin who can put up a lot of blocks. I don't think we've mentioned the blocking discrepancy yet. Wisconsin actually outblocks Nebraska 11-7 in this match. Nebraska had a hard time dealing with Wisconsin's block. I think Jackson did get trap set a couple of times. It's hard to get set into a double block when you're a middle and do something with it. Jackson as well, though, on the slide needs to probably mix up her shots a little bit and really try to tool, I think would be helpful for her. But it's not the kind of block she's used to seeing, because Andy Jackson can hit over most blocks, but not against, 6'7", 6'9", 6'4" that Wisconsin can run up there.
Yeah, and they were sitting on the pin waiting for her slide attacks too. So that really opened up, I thought, a lot of back row attacks, and that's where Becca Alec really feasted, was those quick sets with the blocker sitting out on the pin. So that was the second set. Nebraska took care of business. Third set, come out of the break. Wisconsin jumps out to a 5-2 lead. 4 of those points came on hitting errors. Jackson hit wide, got blocked. Murray got blocked. Beeson hits from the back row long, and all of a sudden it's like, oh no, has Nebraska lost its mojo? No, because they quickly, Orzel hits an error. Harper Murray goes back and serves. This time Nebraska runs off 7 points in a row, goes up 9-5. Landfare is kind of very key during this run. She had 2 kills and then teamed up with Jackson on a block. A couple different Wisconsin errors were mixed into that as well too.
One more thing that Landfare did that really stuck out to me during that rally, like, she is not known for her floor defense. That was kind of considered her weaknesses when she came to Nebraska. She laid out to get a tip up off the floor, probably Franklin, who tips a lot, to keep a rally alive that Nebraska ended up winning as well. So you kind of got the full Taylor Landfare experience early in game 3 with kill, a block, a nice pancake to keep a ball up off the floor. And once again, Nebraska, with their pressure early in a set, just made Wisconsin kind of chase the match from the early part of it.
And Wisconsin did rally. They went on an 8-3 run, ties it up 14-14, but Nebraska answers. They win 5 of the next 6 rallies. And again, another key service error too, by Damrow. I mean, Wisconsin was down 16-15 after a Booth kill. This was the set that the middle blockers really stepped up and got involved in the Wisconsin offense, but momentum just kind of deflated with a missed serve, and then missed serve puts Nebraska up 2. Orzel hits wide, and then Jackson solo stuffs Anna Smrek, and then at that point, 19-15, it felt like this is done. Nebraska's kind of re-exerted their control, and they cruised, and I think Wisconsin only scored 2 more points after that. Nebraska, it kind of is a very similar ending to the match up in Madison, that Nebraska kind of were scuffling a little bit too, but then that third set they take control, and then it's over.
Nebraska was definitely, in both matches against Wisconsin this year, Nebraska was the better team once you got to 20 points. And they pull away late in game 3. I talked a little bit after the match with Nebraska radio play-by-play announcer John Baylor, and Anna Smrek in this match. Anna Smrek's a player who I feel like hits 500 against everybody except Nebraska, and I don't know why Nebraska or why Wisconsin can't really get her going against Nebraska. And Nebraska does a good job defensively, but Smrek's 6'9". And against, if Nebraska or if Wisconsin was playing like Michigan State, she would have had 11 kills and hit 550. Smrek against Nebraska on Saturday night hits 130 with just 6 kills on 23 swings. She had fewer swings than Julia Orzel, who had 26 swings and had 4 errors as well. So Wisconsin just kind of became the Sarah Franklin experience on Saturday. They did start to get Carter Booth going a little bit late in the set. Booth actually was the most efficient Wisconsin attacker, had 7 kills on 11 swings, hit 545. But then you look at a player like Devin Robinson, who's incredibly athletic, 3 kills, 3 errors. She had an error late in game 3 that helped Nebraska to pull away. And Anna Smrek is a player that probably can't wait to stop playing Nebraska, because she hit negative up in that match in Madison as well.
Yeah. The one, Anna Smurk did have kind of a breakout match against Nebraska in that 21 title match too, but she was one of the seniors that John Cook gave a roast to before that. He's like, have a good career. Thanks for playing. But yeah, she struggled. She had 0 kills on two airs on 6 swings in that third set. So she really kind of struggled a bit. I mean, well, all of Wisconsin struggled except for Carter Booth. Carter Booth had 4 kills on 5 swings in the 5th set. You take that away. I mean, Wisconsin had hit 0 with 6 kills, 6 errors on 30 swings in that 5th set. So,
Nebraska does the thing, and they've done it for a while, where on their senior night, they will give flowers to recognize the opposing team seniors. And usually there's like 2 or 3. And it really jumped out to me on Saturday night how many seniors Wisconsin has and how many players they're going to lose after this season. You've got Franklin is gone, Smrek is gone, and Robinson, I think, is gone.
CC Crawford is gone.
Like, there's a lot of players that Wisconsin is losing after this year.
Yeah, Carly Anderson, backup setter, who has played defense specialist. But yeah, I think there were 6 different roses they hand out. It's a nice gesture.
They had to buy like a whole bouquet just for Wisconsin.
Yeah. For sure. But I mean, what's that? When you're buying 5 bouquets for your seniors, just get a 6. That's probably the free one they get and they hand out. So, but big win for Nebraska. Let's look at, we also have passing numbers too. By courtesy of our good friend Abbott. But yeah, it's exactly what you expect. Lexi Rodriguez, it was a 2.5 with a 60% good ball passing percentage too. So what do you expect from her? What was kind of surprising was Olivia Mauk struggled a little bit too. She got aced twice, and they were true aces. She got shanked. It wasn't like she was out of position. She just struggled to handle a little bit. I thought Troy Boy played a pretty good match too. She finished with 7 digs, but again, she was her typical flying self, getting digs fully laid out and keeping rallies alive. So a good job from her.
Let's talk about Lexi for a second. I want to give her due, and we don't just gloss over her. Not only was she Nebraska's best passer last night, passing a 2.5, which is better than anyone else in the match. She had a dig late in game 3 that really stuck out to me. I think it was Devin Robinson. For her struggles, Robinson can put a ton of heat on the ball and hit a line shot that Rodriguez dug. And it was an over dig. It went back to Wisconsin, but Nebraska ended up winning the point. And it just again showed you that Lexi Rodriguez is kind of the backbone of this team. In my opinion, she got the biggest cheer when the seniors were introduced before the match. She was the last one introduced. This crowd loves Lexi Rodriguez, and I think recognizes how good that she is. She also had a 1-arm dig on match point. Nebraska was going to win the match. They had a healthy cushion, but I think it was Franklin hit a shot that Rodriguez had a 1-arm dig, couldn't even get her platform up, just stuck her right arm out and dug it perfectly in transition to Bergen Riley, who was able to feed Beeson for the match winning kill. But it's just like, ho-hum, sticking my arm out, perfect transition dig. Like, Lexi Rodriguez is incredible, and I hope that all Nebraska volleyball fans recognize kind of what a special player they've been able to watch over the last 4 years.
Yeah, that transition is nice. Let's give you our update, our record watch for Lexi Rodriguez. It was kind of cool too because they honored the silver medalist Jordan Larson, who's of course on staff too. But Justine Wong-Arantes was in town, so they recognized her for winning the silver medal too. So she's the current record holder. Again, 1890 she has. Rodriguez with her 16 digs against Wisconsin. She is up to 1789. So at most, Nebraska has 8 matches left. That means she needs to average 12.7. So she's been right about that match. She was over that against Wisconsin, right about that against Iowa. So it's plausible, but Nebraska needs to reach the title match. I worry about play
a bunch of 5-setters.
Well, yeah, I worry about the Maryland match and the first round that Nebraska, whoever they play, if she'll get enough it'll be a quick match, and get enough digs against those kind of opponents is the challenge. So we'll see, but she's on pace. It's doable, but Nebraska needs to keep winning. And if they drop a set or 2, not the worst thing in the world for her record chase.
So that's Nebraska's 41st consecutive home win at the Devaney Center Saturday night against Wisconsin. It keeps Nebraska undefeated in Big Ten play. If Nebraska was able to beat Penn State and Maryland this week, Nebraska would become the first unbeaten Big Ten champion if you don't count the COVID year in 2020, because I think Wisconsin went unbeaten during that abbreviated schedule. You have to go all the way back to those great Penn State teams of like 2008, 2009 for when a team went all the way through Big Ten play undefeated.
Yeah, it's impressive. I need to look up this quote exactly, but I think John Cook said before the season that, I don't know if he said it'd be impossible, but he said it'd be quite the feat if the team were to go undefeated. But that's the task for next week. Let's move on to rotation 2 and our other match of the week to talk about. Nebraska, they went to Iowa City, not Ames. They went to Iowa City, sorry. Played a little
suburban Iowa City too. I think they built that place in north in Coralville.
Yeah,
by the outlets.
Yeah, the favorite place to talk about old dinosaurs is Coralville. So Nebraska made very quick work against Iowa, winning it 25-12, 25-17, 25-19. Nebraska did what they should do against a team of Iowa's caliber, who's kind of the bottom tier of the Big Ten. Hit .472, which was their best hitting percentage in a Big Ten match since 2017. So really were efficient, got the job done. There was no letdown. Everyone got into play too. They kind of rotated. Layla Blackwell and Lindsey Krause got in for the third set. Used everybody on the bench. Is just kind of good to see. Good to see an extended run from there. I don't think. Well, Maisie Bosinger didn't.
I was going to say, did Maisie Bosinger get in?
No, Maisie Bosinger did not play. I'm looking at the box score. Yeah, I was just double checking. So all the attackers got to play. Sorry, Maisie.
Harper Murray led Nebraska 11 kills and hit .556 on Wednesday night in Iowa City. Taylor Landfare, nobody's got eye-popping numbers in this match because it happened so quickly. Landfare 7 kills, 3 blocks. Merritt Beeson had 7 kills and 3 blocks. The middles combined for 13 kills. Annie Jackson 7 kills on 8 swings. Maybe she hit a toasty .875 against the Hawkeyes. And then Lindsey Krause had a really nice set when she got in game 3. Krause put away 6 balls on 8 swings, hit .750. So a really nice showcase for her. Bergen Riley continues to lead the Big Ten in assists per set, thanks largely to nights like Wednesday, where she had 41 assists in 3 sets. So a really good all-around match for Riley as well, and really showed it off from the service line too. She had 2 aces in the match. She ended game 1 on a 9-0 service run. So this was like every Nebraska-Iowa match. I think I looked it up before the match. Nebraska hasn't lost a set playing in Iowa City since like 1987, back in rally scoring days. I think they lost like one of those 16-14 deuce game rally set.
Side out scoring.
Side out scoring sets. The 2 sets I think Nebraska has dropped against Iowa since coming into the Big Ten have both been in Lincoln, oddly enough.
Yeah, that was in 2019, I think. I also have a weird habit of never watching Iowa play in Lincoln, so I've missed all those matches, so the sets that Nebraska's lost. But but again, another key takeaway too. I mean, we talk about all the big service runs Nebraska had against Wisconsin. Here's a 9-0 run by a completely different setter. So Nebraska is showing their ability to go on runs with a number of different people at the service line. So it's
if Bergen Riley's serving, that means they're in rotation 1. And we talked a little bit about this last night off air, that rotation 1 is now Nebraska's weakest offensive rotation. It's their lowest hitting percentage. And so if you can run off 9 straight points in your weakest rotation, that's probably pretty good.
Yeah.
So
I think that's more kind of in the serve receive in rotation 1, because that's the one where Merritt Beeson and Taylor Landfare are flipped and they hit their non-natural pins. So, getting that rotation number up, no matter if you're serve receive or serving, is a good thing.
Absolutely. All right. Anything else you want to talk about with Iowa? We breezed through that, but Nebraska breezed through Iowa too. So Nebraska remains undefeated. Yeah, the winning streak is at 25 matches, and we will set up the week against Penn State and Maryland coming up later in rotation 6. Rotation 3, a lot of stuff is still happening in the Big Ten, even though at the top it's kind of settled. It's either going to be Nebraska, Penn State, or both. winning the Big Ten championship. Wisconsin set up Saturday's match with what I thought was maybe the match of the year as far as drama and competitiveness went. Wisconsin played Minnesota in Madison on Wednesday night and survives in 5 sets. The match went to 20-18 in the 5th. Both teams had match points. Wisconsin finally is able to put it away. But Minnesota, again, is one of those teams that they've gone to extra points in Game 5 against Wisconsin twice now. They challenged Nebraska more than Wisconsin did. If you look at the box score, like, this Minnesota team is pretty darn good. And they're sitting there, they're going to be ranked around 15th or 16th. They might get to host the first weekend of the tournament, or, you could see them get sent to a place like Omaha again and have to play Creighton. But this Minnesota team has a lot of talent. They just couldn't pull it together enough to stop Wisconsin late in Game 5.
Yeah, it was a very exciting. I mean, except for the second set was weird. They went what was it, a 10-0 run, I think it was. Minnesota went on. It was something double. It was just weird. The second set was 25, ended up being 25-12 Minnesota winning it behind that 10-0 run too. But every other set was very close, and that, like I said, that 5th set was just a slugfest and keep going back and forth too. I mean, Wisconsin recorded 6 blocks in the 5th set. Their final 4 points of the match came on blocks too. And to me, that just meant, I mean, I don't know, Minnesota was running out of gas, and they were just lining up and swinging as hard as they could. And against a team as big as Wisconsin, that is a recipe for disaster.
They were out of system a little bit. If I remember from watching, Minnesota's serve receive is kind of their one big weakness this year. And they just couldn't get in system where Melanie Schaffmaster had a bunch of different options. I thought Schaffmaster, for being one of the more offensive-minded setters in the Big Ten, probably could have done more to send the second contact over herself. She can get up so high, she can really throw it down. And that was probably a time she needed to try that. But great night for the Badgers. Yeah.
She did once and got stuffed by Booth, I think. I mean, one of those 4 points was on Schaffmaster. I think that was kind of out of necessity because Minnesota was scrambling and out of sorts. So, it was
the big guns fired for both teams in this match. Sarah Franklin, 19 kills and 11 digs. Julia Hansen, who had a really nice match for the Gophers against Nebraska last week, had 20 kills and 18 digs for Minnesota. Lydia Grote, 17 kills for the Gophers. And Minnesota actually out-hit Wisconsin 208 to 158. So, one of the best offensive teams in the Big Ten. Wisconsin hits 158 against Minnesota on Wednesday, comes back and doesn't break 200 again against Nebraska on Saturday. And so, they've got some things they need to figure out going into the tournament.
For sure, yeah, but Minnesota, I think hopefully they'll definitely make it. I think you said like they're borderline, depending on what other chaos happens in that lower. I think we talk about this with Daniel Gilman, but it's one of those teams that, depending on how the last week breaks, they could be a host, or they could be one of those teams that other hosts don't want to see. So another big match in the Big Ten. Penn State took care of business against Purdue, swept them for the second time this season. A little bit, I mean, it is okay, but I mean, 20-20, 23-16 were the scores that Purdue managed in the 3 sets. So Penn State keeps pace. They're still 1 match behind Nebraska. Cameron Hanna, she actually led the offense. She had 14 kills. Jess Maruzik added 11. Big night for Maggie Mendelson, 10 kills and hit 529 and had 4 blocks. So good match for her. She kind of led the charge from the middle as well. Penn State and Penny 242. Hudson had a quiet night for her with only 12 kills as the Boilermakers hit 142. And Penn State seems to have Purdue's number. Both matches that they played were sweeps and just took care of business.
Absolutely. So Purdue falls in Happy Valley, but they did pick up a sweep of USC earlier in the week, 25-22, 29-27, 25-20. Eva Hudson, again, another big night, 18 kills. Raven Colvin, 14 kills. Purdue is very clearly, I would say, the 4th or 5th best team in the Big Ten. That's kind of where they've settled this year. They're going to beat every team below them and really struggle with the teams above them. Allie Batenhorst had 14 kills for USC in that match. But, these teams right now are just trying to close out the regular season strong before seeing where they're going to get seeded in the tournament next Sunday.
Yeah, Purdue. You mentioned fourth or fifth too. The team that they're battling is Oregon. They actually play Oregon in the final week of the season too. So then we can definitively say whether they're fourth or fifth in that kind of pecking order as well too.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yep.
the other big match, speaking of teams from out west, Washington visited Ohio State, and they were swept by the Buckeyes. This is Ohio State's best win this season, especially in the Big Ten portion of the season. It wasn't even that close, too. I mean, Washington scored 11 points in the first set, then 22 and 19. Emily Londot doing what she does, had 16 kills. Emily Selman had 10, and Mia Tumen had 30 assists and also 4 aces. 40 aces would be impressive. 4 aces, still a
record.
very good match, yeah. But yeah, offense just wasn't there for Washington. They only hit 100. Hit 28 total kills across the 3 sets, so that's not going to get it done. Huskies kind of stubbed their toe visiting Columbus.
Well, and what you're seeing this year, and we should put together at the end of the season, like actually quantify this. But when those West Coast teams come east to either Central or Eastern time zone, they do not play well. USC and UCLA, every time they come to the Midwest or East Coast, just feels like they really struggle. Washington comes to Ohio State and hits just 100. This has been rough on them. And, we should break it down at the end of the season, spreadsheet it and everything. But
just they go to Minnesota,
these results week by week. We talk about Hawaii a little bit later on in the show. Every road trip Hawaii has to make, even to California, is at least a 2-hour time change. So, there is something to be said for how these West Coast teams have been playing when they've come back east. We've known about it in the NFL for years, and you're seeing it now in like college volleyball.
Yeah, except for when they go to the Minnesota, because apparently Pacific Northwest does really well in Minnesota and get two wins against the Gophers too. That's still a puzzling weekend. The other kind of eye-catching, a couple ones. We don't talk about Rutgers a lot too, but
what? We never talk about Rutgers.
Let's talk about Rutgers. Well, first the bad. Rutgers played Illinois. They scored just 6 points in the second set. They had 5 kills, and Illinois had 1 hitting error. So not a good set. And it was actually mildly close to start too. I mean, Illinois was up 7-4, but then they went on a run of 10-0. Quick slide out, and then 7-0 run for the Illini. They weren't really challenged, but 6 points in the set's never good. You think a team is doomed with that, but no, not so fast. Rutgers bounced back on Saturday night, and they defeated Northwestern for their first Big Ten win. So hats off to the Scarlet Knights for not being shut out in the Big Ten this season.
So that means is Iowa still winless?
No, everyone's won. Everyone else at least won 3 matches, I think, and then Rutgers was kind of trailing off behind that group in front of them.
All right. And then, because the middle of the Big Ten, and maybe, there's 11 teams in the middle, I guess, quote unquote, of the Big Ten. Everyone's just kind of beating each other. UCLA beats Illinois in 4. Might be a tough check mark against the at-large resume for Chris Thomas's group. Last year they were on the bubble. I think one of the last teams or first teams out in the tournament. I'm not sure what their record is right now. I'm not looking at the standings, but
18-10. They are 10-8 in the Big
okay.
Ten.
Being over 500 in the Big Ten should be something that I think gets you in the tournament. But if the committee decides, hey, we don't want to take 11 Big Ten teams in the tournament, we're going to cap that at like 9. Illinois will be right on the bubble, and they're on bubble watch this week. They're hoping in the conference tournaments that there's no real big upsets from these one bid leagues.
Yeah, the hard part for Illinois is I don't know what their best win of the season is. I mean, they lost to Dayton in the non-conference. They beat Western Kentucky, but the rest of the non-con was pretty lackluster. They lost to Missouri in 5. But as far as the Big Ten conference, they've beaten team. I mean, they did beat USC is probably their best win when USC. So they do have that, but other than that, they've kind of beat teams in the lower tier and lost the teams in the top tier. So, that'll be an interesting test case to see how the committee looks at such a large conference and how many they're going to take out of that. So, again, we go into the final week of the Big Ten season. Nebraska is 18-0. Penn State is currently. They are 16-1. They do play Washington. We're recording this Sunday morning. Penn State plays Washington later this afternoon, and then they play Wednesday and then Friday. So the last match of the year will be then. But then Wisconsin has been officially eliminated from the Big Ten race with their third loss. So they're 3 games behind Nebraska with 2 games remaining.
So really unless something shocking happens, like Penn State losing to Rutgers or Nebraska losing to Maryland or Washington, and that's right, because that'll be is that in Seattle or is that in Happy Valley?
That is in Happy Valley, yeah, because they lost at Ohio State and they're going from Ohio State to Penn State.
So you're really only 2 outcomes of the Big Ten title race is Nebraska winning it outright or Nebraska sharing it with Penn State. Is that accurate?
Yes.
As long as Nebraska beats Maryland on Saturday, and that's in Maryland, which, crazier things have happened. We'll touch on Maryland and Penn State in just a little bit. But right now, Nebraska, one hand on the Big Ten championship trophy, will have the chance to clinch it on Friday afternoon, evening, however we want to put it. It's an early start, but to go out and play Penn State. Let's move into rotation 4. Lots of other things. We've been really Big Ten heavy early in this show, but a lot of conference matchup or conference title races are coming down to the wire. We're going to start with the Creighton Blue Jays, who have clinched the Big East championship for, I believe, the 11th straight year. Creighton actually, surprisingly, lost a set to DePaul earlier this week. It's just a third set the Blue Jays dropped in Big East play. They, took their medicine and came back and rolled DePaul over the next 3 sets to win in 4. The Blue Jays are actually going to probably have first serve right about the time we finish recording today. They're going to close against Xavier on Sunday, and then they will have the Big East Conference tournament coming up this weekend, which they will host in Omaha to try to strengthen their case for a top 4 national seed for the first time ever.
Yes. Chaos continues to happen in the ACC. Florida State, they picked up a big upset win over Georgia Tech. They prevailed 15-10 in the 5th set. Audrey Koenig kind of led the 4 Seminoles. This was just a very stat-heavy game. I looked at you play 5 sets. There's going to be a lot of rallies, a lot of points scored, a lot of digs to have. But Koenig led Florida State with 18 kills. Taylor Head, our friend from Arkansas last year, she now plays for Florida State. She had 13 kills and 23 digs. Otene led Georgia Tech with 18, and then Berlatino had 17 kills, 19 digs. There were 6 players that had doubles. Both teams were on the 6-2, so you're going to get a lot more assists and digs. Mm-hmm. But it was just stats to be had by all for this one. But big win for Florida State. It hurts Georgia Tech a little bit. We'll talk about that. They're kind of, again, in that same group as Minnesota, as potentially one of those. They could host a first and second round, but this did not help their case, losing against Florida State.
We're going to move into the SEC, where the Florida Gators have now won 10 straight matches after a 4-set win over Central Florida. Kennedy Martin continues to blow up box scores over the last month. She had 29 kills and hit 510 against Central Florida. This is their sophomore opposite. She has 7 matches this year where she's had at least 25 kills. Listen to her stat lines over the last 3 Florida matches: 32 kills, 31 kills, 29 kills. Over those last 3 matches, Martin's had 172 swings, averaging almost 60 swings per match in Florida's last 3 matches. They're riding her very hard. The Gators are at 11-3 in the SEC, so 1 game behind Kentucky. Still a chance for Florida to try to grab at least a share of the SEC championship. And this is a big week in the SEC because Kentucky and Missouri play, and then Florida, I believe, has to play Arkansas this week as well.
Yes, for sure. Speaking of Missouri too, they about stubbed their toe playing against Ole Miss. They had to go 5 against the Rebels, but they ended up winning the 5th set 15-11. So they're also 1 game behind Kentucky in the loss column. Michael Vernon's been their workhorse, and not as big a workhorse as Kennedy Martin is, but she had 18 kills, 12 digs, and then Nia Washington had 14 kills, 10 digs for Ole Miss. So a lot of opportunities. Kentucky is rising up to the challenge, had kind of a lackluster non-con, but again, found themselves the same thing that they did last year, found themselves, and they've won 9 in a row. Florida also, talk about teams that have found themselves, but Florida's I think their issue is more of injuries too. Kennedy Martin
missed some time.
Ankle, then Alexis Stuckey was returning from her ACL injury from a year ago. They both kind of were on the court for the first time together in late September, but have really found their rhythm as of late too. So,
and you know who we haven't talked at all about in the SEC section of the show is Texas. Texas is not going to factor into the SEC championship in their first season in the league.
Yeah, it's just so. I mean, they had those 3 losses in a row to all against to non-ranked. They this was also they lost to A&M, Missouri back when Missouri was unranked, and Oklahoma as well too. Texas did avenge that lost Oklahoma on Friday night too, but they closed with Tennessee and Ole Miss, and they're also kind of in that group behind Kentucky. But yeah, it's weird that Texas is on the outside looking in their first season. They expected to come in and just completely own and dominate the SEC, but they have not done so this year.
Moving on to the Big 12, the Arizona State Sun Devils have clinched the Big 12's automatic berth. They had wins over Iowa State and Colorado last week. They have 1-game lead on Kansas, who they beat out in Tempe, and that's why they own the tiebreaker as well. They have 1 match left this coming week against Central Florida. And I threw this in here because this really surprised me. I don't know what put the thought in my head to check on, like, hey, I haven't heard much about Iowa State this year, and they're always pretty solid. Iowa State's having a rough year this year. Our old friend Christy Johnson-Lynch, former Husker setter, is going to finish under 500 with Iowa State for the first time in her 20-year tenure in Ames. I guess there's a big asterisk by that because they were also under 500 during the COVID season when matches were getting canceled all over the place and the whole schedule was, held in the phantom zone. They were 8-12 that year. But they've won 20 matches each of the last 2 seasons. So, they've been on a nice high. They're going to finish under 500 this year. They're going to close the season hosting 2 ranked teams. They have to play Utah and Kansas this week. So a rough season this year in Ames for the volleyball program.
Yeah, you hate to see that too. I mean, that's what in my preparations for is I have an article of coaches who are going to replace John Cook, and Christy Johnson Lynch is on that list too. But I mean, you ask about, was it 10 years ago?
10 years ago, she might have been the front.
She was the hot name, and she had turned Iowa State was nothing before she went there. She built it up to a really good program, a perennial tournament contender. And
I think they won 8 matches the year before she was hired there. And this is going to be their worst season since that season back in the early 2000s.
Yeah. So that's our national look. There's a lot of good matches. Just you'll want to set aside some time on Wednesday to watch it. The marquee one, of course, for Nebraska fans they want to watch is number 1 Pitt is playing at number 3 Louisville at 6 p.m. at the ACC network. So, but there's 6 different ranked versus ranked. So take some time off, make sure your subscriptions are up to date and watch that. So
if you're going to ignore your family on Thursday to watch a lot of football, why not ignore them also on Wednesday to watch some great volleyball?
It's good. It's set up. It's a feast week, feast on some volleyball. So let's move into rotation 5 with our guest, Daniel Gilman of 6 Rotations. All right, we move on to our next rotation. We are joined by Daniel Gilman, the man of 6 Rotations, joins us again this year to take kind of a looking at the national landscape as we head into the last week of the regular season. The postseason's just around the corner, but we are excited to have, you may recognize his face. You see him. He unveils the AVCA rankings every single week, so he's the man with all the inside knowledge.
You're the first person, Dan, that people get mad at when they see the rankings. They don't interpret it as a coach they should get mad at. They're just mad at you. How does that feel?
I've gotten to a point where I'm happy that the AVCA gets people to get mad, especially because the National Player of the Year semifinalists, that got people pretty mad.
We were mad about it, or at least I was.
And I unveiled that as well. And people got way more mad about the Player of the Year stuff. And yes, in the very beginning too. And I even kind of, I asked a question, very similar to like Reese Davis being able to be like, well, I asked the committee and I was wondering about this middle list scenario stuff. And the answer I got was this was heavily discussed, so they are aware of it. And I was like, oh, well, at least there's that, and I think with the AVCA, and what we've seen from the growth of it in the last 5 years, where people didn't even really know what the letters stood for, in 2018, 2019, and to see what first Keegan Cook and now the push to get a big name AD to come in and Jamie Gordon to lead it. And we're seeing a movement into it actually mattering, which I think is huge for the sport. And I'm happy to kind of be a bit of a segue to try to make it more, filled with some youth for the social media lights.
Yeah. You mentioned that too. I mean, I was glad that people care about it now too. You mentioned the rankings there. I think there's been I get a lot of pushback, a lot of people commenting here like, oh, Nebraska's beat this team this week. Are they finally going to be number one? What is your take on the Nebraska versus Pitt debate and kind of how they kind of stack up in your eyes?
I knew this was going to be asked, right? And it's a great question. I'm glad you're not asking me who deserves to be number one. In terms of the conversation behind it, it has fueled this volleyball talk in a way that's so positive. I'm just happy that the question gets asked every week. I would so much rather there be a 1A and a 1B than to have the runaway number one team like maybe we've had in 3 of the last 5 years. I think the shakeups and the fact that they both had the big loss to SMU and the fact that they both went on this crazy winning streak, they both have this huge matchup at the end of the season. It's really lining up beautifully because we've got Louisville, Pitt. Obviously, Nebraska took care of Wisconsin, but then they've got the matchup in Rec Hall. And, it's so good for the sport. At the end of the day, you ask me, it does not matter who's one or who's two for their specific journeys to the Final Four. I just don't think it's not a significant difference like it might be in football where you get to play against this seed instead of this seed. Because if you ask me too, I think the 3 and the 4 in Louisville and Penn State are microscopically separate as well, So yeah, I think Nebraska, I'm going to get it out of the way early. I think Nebraska is the best team in the country.
Ooh.
So I think, I agree with you that it's a great thing that to argue about, like as closest as we come to like barstool arguments about this sport. It's great that we're even having them. It's another thing we mentioned, people get mad at you for unveiling the rankings of the player of the year semifinalists. Really the next thing people are going to get mad about is next weekend with the seedings. I think, Lincoln and I talked at the Nebraska-Wisconsin match on Saturday night. Nebraska beating Wisconsin pretty much clinches a top 4 seed for them. Pittsburgh obviously going to be one of the top 4 seeds. It probably doesn't matter which is 1 and which is 2 because it looks like they're on a collision course for the Final Four. But I think that a potential matchup there is just so interesting because they're different teams. Like Nebraska is not the sexiest like offensive team. Pittsburgh puts up these crazy hitting numbers, and who knows what Nebraska's attack percentage would be like if they played in the ACC. But it's sort of a cool contrast of styles. Not that Pitt can't play defense as well. I mean, I think they still lead the country in opposing hitting percentage, but they look like different volleyball teams when you kind of look at how they like to play, which makes it a really interesting hypothetical discussion.
There's a lot of people that have said on X or Twitter or whatever, like, oh, I'm so upset they didn't get to play this year. I think it's kind of fun that we get the hypothetical that they didn't play, because does a match on the second week of the season really dictate who you will be in December? The answer is no. And I think a couple teams, we were kind of talking off air about Kentucky. That's a team that never seems to wake up for that beginning of the season, but they're ready come early December every year. And Purdue is another team that struggled a little bit in non-con play, but they are a team that usually gets through the first 2 matches without too much stress. And so I'm happy that we don't get it, because I mean, fingers crossed in Louisville, we could get Nebraska Pitt. But at the same time, if we don't get it, it's one of those ultimate what ifs that happens in sports all the time. Between 1 versus 2 never got to happen in, the early 2000s in college football or something like that.
I think what this sets up is your Sweet 16 on is going to be really good. I think there's enough teams that are really good this year. Maybe Pittsburgh and Nebraska seem right now like they're in a level by themselves, but you take it all the way back through the Oregons and the Minnesotas. That's going to be an amazing Sweet 16 on through the end of the tournament.
And that's what Sunday is going to be a decider for in my eyes. I'm really excited to see who gets the 14, 15, 16, because that's so much more of a toss-up than the 3, 4, 5, 6. I just don't think Creighton has done enough to bump them over a team like Louisville or Penn State. So it's like those, Creighton, Stanford, Wisconsin are just not too much of a question mark of the top four, but instead it's Dayton or Oregon or Missouri, Florida, Georgia Tech. Like, are any of these teams going to nab that spot in? And in that same vein, I think we will see 4 or 5 unseeded teams make it to the second weekend because 12 through 16 is very interchangeable with 17 through 25, and so those second seeds in every region are going to be almost as good as the first seed.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned it there too. I mean, who are some of those teams you like, maybe whether they're not hosting that first weekend or one of those lower teams that can make maybe a deep run? Who are some of those teams that may surprise people who are just locked into the top teams or just following Nebraska?
I think, and it kind of depends on who is in, right? But a team like Utah that it may not be on the inside of the bubble. BYU always seems to be dangerous. The Big 12, either
it's a mess.
They're good or they're all kind of not that good aside from Arizona State. But I went to the University of Florida. I worked for the volleyball team. I'm a bit of a Gator. And I think you don't want Kennedy Martin and her 30 kills to come into your arena, and they're probably the number one most dangerous non-top 16 seed. I also think Georgia Tech is a team that if they don't make it into the top 16, they've got Bertolino and they've got big arms that can carry experience, right? Like they went toe-to-toe with Florida, and that was such a fun second-round match last year, the 5-set win for Georgia Tech. Now, albeit it was in Gainesville. And so, we know that Georgia Tech can go on the road and take care of business. I'm not going to buy in on Dayton. Like if they host, I'm just going to probably think that whoever the 2 seed is there is probably going to come out. That's just, it is what it is. That a team like that just has not played a top 30 team.
Yeah. Dan, from your perch in the sport, you get to see into all the different corners of it, and you've got some experience, paying attention to conferences like the Mountain West and the Big West. Are there any sort of, I guess, what we call like group of 5 conference spoilers? You mentioned Dayton as one, but somebody that might jump up into the second weekend of the tournament. Obviously, this is tough to say without seeing like what the bracket looks like, but what do you think of who's going to come out of the Big West or the Mountain West, or even like a Missouri Valley team? Anyone in there that you think could play spoiler in a couple weeks?
That's a great question, Jeff, because Colorado State is a wagon, and they're on a bit of a revenge tour. They were a couple points away from reaching the Ncaa tournament last year. They were upset in the Mountain West final. I got to see them firsthand. They've got 5 seniors. 4 of them average 3 or more kills. I mean, they've got big hitters in the middle. And, the Big West always seems to have that big middle, and Oneo Febu was one of their best. And they also had Amber Igidi from Hawaii, who was a standout. But the Mountain West brought the middles this year. And Naima Weathers and the power that she brings, I think she's 5th in the country in hitting percentage over 440. They've got a senior setter in Emery Herman. That's a team that, we say that regions don't really matter anymore. And, when it comes to these seeding, Colorado State will wind up somewhere that is locally advantageous to them, I'm going to assume. And so if that means going to Omaha, and playing Creighton, or if it means somewhere out on the West Coast like Oregon, I would gear towards them. Cal Poly, a share of the Big West title. I was the broadcaster for 3 years. We'll see what happens in the Big West tournament, right? So like that's not a 2-bid conference this year, I don't think. So if they get out of their conference, it was a weird year for Hawaii. So like I'm not too scared of any of the Big West teams this season. I think Colorado State would be one to watch. When you look at the RPI, and they really like Dayton with that 14th overall spot, South Dakota State is a team 26-1 overall. They lost 1 game, and it was, who was it to? I'm going to have to.
Was it like Denver or Kansas City?
St. Thomas. It's the newly D1 in Minnesota. But, that's a team that the RPI loves. I don't know much about, right? So there's some other ones. LMU was a team that was an at-large. Was it last year or 2 years ago? They're also in the top 30. Usually those RPI darlings seem to make some noise. Northern Iowa always comes out of the Missouri Valley, and they've got powerful hitters. South Dakota a few years ago had a really strong bid. I'm excited for it because we don't know. Maybe we talk in a week and you ask me who my favorite, group of 5 teams are based off of the lie. That's a little different. But if one of these teams has to come to Lincoln or Madison, I'm a little bit less enthused that they're going to get out alive.
Yeah, well, this is the last show that we're going to do before the brackets come out next weekend. And a team that I'm kind of keeping my eye on is, you mentioned Hawaii. Hawaii's sitting, I think, somewhere in the 40s in the RPI, and they just lost again this weekend. Their fans, they have a giant, passionate fan base. They're sort of emotionally preparing themselves to get left out unless they win the Big West tournament. And that's, a school where, volleyball is second to oxygen. So they've had a pretty solid year, but they maybe have to win their conference tournament to get in the NCAA.
Yeah, and they've got one of the more explosive outside presences in all of volleyball. And it's important to remember that they beat SMU. And so that was a situation. We had a player from SMU come on our show and talk about what it was like to be winning so comfortably in the beginning of that match. And that was the first weekend of the season out in Hawaii, and just kind of get stunned in that nature. And it really brought SMU together in a way that should give a little bit of cadence to Hawaii in an at-large conversation. Now, they probably have to go all the way to the final and lose to Cal Poly, or lose to a team that's also got a reputable RPI, because usually 43, you guys know 43 to 45 is that sweet spot that could get you in. I was going to say Kaylin Alexander is the hitter, over 5 kills a set for Hawaii. I'm sure you guys have talked about her.
She's explosive.
Yeah, they just don't have good losses, right? They lost to Riverside. They got swept by Irvine in the 2 matches there. And so those losses are going to be tough. You've got teams right next to Hawaii that are going to probably play their way in, whether it be Rice out of the American that'll win their conference tournament. And then you question who will win the West Coast Conference, because that's a big bid, because if it doesn't go to LMU, they're probably an at-large once again, but Pepperdine is right there. I think Hawaii's got a shot. I think, if you want to ask me behind closed doors, they're probably the favorite to win it, because I would call them the favorite to win it in every Big West tournament. So they were the kind of team on my mind that could get the at-large anyway. I mean, the automatic anyway.
For sure. There's still a lot to be decided this week. I mean, closing the last regular season, we were mentioning how Wednesday is stacking up to be one of the best days of the year. It kind of rivals the September 18th when we had 1 Pitt versus 3 Penn State, Louisville versus Kentucky, Texas, Baylor, Nebraska, Stanford, all on the same night. We got 6 ranked versus ranks matchup. What are you keeping your eye on? Are you setting up 6 TV screens, or how many screens you setting up to watch Wednesday?
Now, the layout is beautiful. They're not all at 7 o'clock. Remember that September 18th? It's like everything started right at 7 Eastern or 6 Central. We've got FSU, SMU, which will be a big game for Florida State, because they don't really have a marquee win in the second half of the season. That starts at noon. So I've got that, locked and loaded. We don't have to worry about football. Noon Eastern. Sorry. Yes. I'm over. I moved over from Pacific to Eastern. So 11 a.m. for you in the middle of the country, get to wake up, enjoy what is going to be daytime college basketball too that day. So to be honest, I'll probably have 2 TVs with some feast week action, maybe the Maui tournament for basketball, SMU, Florida State, Stanford, Georgia Tech will be the game that gets Georgia Tech into the conversation for the top 16 if they can win. I've not been impressed with Stanford. They have just kind of middled their way through beating all the bad teams, beating all the decent teams, but not picking up any of the really top tier ACC wins. And then the nighttime comes around. Purdue, Oregon's a rematch of a really fun Sweet 16 matchup that I called back in the 2020 COVID tournament, where Purdue won in 5 sets. I always like that little rivalry, but BYU Kansas is something I don't know. It's like the Big 12 is a car crash you can't stop watching, So it's like the Big 12 has a big match. I love tuning in. Obviously, Pitt Louisville on ACC Network, the one kind of big cable game that night, will be really, really interesting. I think Pitt is going to handle them, honestly. I think Pittsburgh is a head and shoulders better team, but I'm always wrong about Louisville. They seem to prove me wrong every year.
Yeah.
And that went 5 in Pittsburgh when Pitt was able to hold on and win. This one's in Louisville.
Yeah. The nice part is, too, they are kind of stacked, but you got to get out that pocketbook. You got to pay for that ACC network extra. You got to get BTN Plus or ESPN Plus, SEC Plus. That's the only downside to all these great matches. But like you said, it will be exciting all day long. Take the day off of work Wednesday. Start your Thanksgiving break early and feast on some volleyball action as well.
What are you guys thinking? Because it's an early one on Friday too, right? At Penn State, 4:00 Central.
4:00, yeah.
Is that something that the community is confident about, or is that one because obviously the conference is on the line?
Yeah. I mean, we talk, or we're gonna talk a lot about Nebraska, Penn State coming up in our next rotation. I think the beating Wisconsin on Saturday takes a lot of the pressure off Nebraska. Obviously, you're going to Penn State's a huge match. Nebraska's actually played pretty well there the last few times that they've played. Nebraska doesn't need to win this match to get a number one national seed. They're playing for a conference championship, which, while meaningful, is not, the prize that this group is looking for. So it wouldn't surprise me if both teams played well. Honestly, no result in this match would shock me. Penn State, when they've played poorly this year, it's been away from home. They get this match at Rec Hall. It's going to be senior night for them. They're going to be fired up. And so I think, Nebraska's got their work cut out for them against a team that if they get hot offensively, they can roll anyone.
It's going to be extremely emotional as well, obviously, with Coach Shoemaker-Cawley, and she just picked up her 200th win, so I'm sure they'll celebrate that. The Purdue match was certainly emotional with the players giving the pink roses.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited. I don't know what's going to happen.
Also, don't forget about the Nebraska subplot. If you got Mendelson and Juravicius on the other side of the net playing against their former team too. So yeah, everything you said, plus a little extra, personal motivation. Both sides are probably motivated to beat their former teammates.
And you don't want to share a conference title. You don't want to do that. You want to have the perfect conference season. You want to win it outright. And like you said, if there was a chance to be the number one overall team, it's not going to come if you lose to Penn State. You've got to win that match. Mm-hmm. Even then, it will be a coin flip. I think Nebraska, unless Louisville gets swept, and Pittsburgh dominate, then everything gets thrown into the flux. But, what I'm looking at in that one, and you saw the blocking really go against Nebraska, but you would imagine that, right? Wisconsin's almost always going to outblock their opponents. Will Taylor Trammell be the blocking leader, or will it be Jackson? Will it be Becca? Will it be on that favorite? Because in Rec Hall, I've been in there. I don't know if you guys have been. It is a raucous environment. It's like everybody is somehow drunk, even though they're kids. You know what I mean? It's just like the people involved that work for Penn State are not nice to you because you're coming in. Like, I was a Purdue radio guy, right? So it's like they throw you really high up. They don't say nice things to you. It was the Russ Rose era, so I'm sure it's a little different now. But that place is really tough to play.
Oh, yeah.
Russ Rose, oddly nice to us, or at least me, in my experience. But I think he had a soft spot for Nebraska, just having spent a couple years here in the 70s. We're with Daniel Gilman, co-host of the Six Rotation podcast. You should check that out. He does a great job with Mick Haley. You're going to see him a lot coming up as the NCAA brackets are unveiled. Dan, we want to get you out on this. We mentioned a little bit ago the National Player of the Year semifinalists being unveiled. The National Player of the Year finalists, the three of them are going to be released in a couple weeks, right before the Final Four. Right now, who's your favorite one or two players that you think are going to be either finalists, or is there an obvious choice to you right now as to who the front runner for National Player of the Year is?
I don't have a certainty to this, but I think that nobody's mind is made up. Usually you'll have a situation where the Heisman or something like that, the National Player of the Year, the decision is made. I think this is going to go right up until the Final Four. I don't know the date that they're going to announce the finalists. I think it's probably in the middle of the NCAA tournament. So I think the next 2 weeks will be really big. It's really hard pressed for me not to consider Bergen to be one of the favorites. I really think that it just 6 setters, right, out of the 14. That's got to be a nod to the favoritism towards setting this year. Yeah. And so Fairbanks and Riley feel to me like they are in the driver's seat, depending on how. It's just purely a guess, right? No idea. Babcock feels as well. It does feel like it's going to come from Nebraska or Pittsburgh. I'm going to say that as my
Olivia Babcock is probably who I would pick if I had to pick right now. But I think you're right that the committee, this is one of the sports where the first part of the postseason really does matter when it comes to National Player of the Year. And if Kennedy Martin keeps putting up 25 kill matches, like, she's going to kind of crowbar her way into that conversation.
25 is an off night for her.
Yeah, I think if we see, she put 29 against UCF over the last weekend. I think if she has 30 in the NCAA tournament, both matches, she'll be a finalist. I don't consider it to be enough to be the national player of the year. She did miss time, and she's so young, and I'm sure that's factored in as well, that she has so much more of her career, whether she spends it in Gainesville or in Lincoln, or, you never know.
Yeah, we'll talk about transfer season later, but yeah, I'm just excited that there's two liberos, Elena Scott, Lexi Rodriguez. Let's give props to the libero side.
Don't count out Lexi, as a finalist, just because of what she's meant to the sport and how good she's been in every single, match and every year.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Well, thank you for your thoughts, Dan. It's Daniel Gilman with 6 Rotations. Check him out every Monday. He comes out with the rankings every week, and he'll also have some great bracket breakdown and tournament breakdown. So 6 Rotation podcast he co-hosts with Mick Haley. So check him out. After you're done listening to us, go find him, download it. Great content as always. So Daniel, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the postseason.
Absolutely. Talk to you guys soon. Have a great Thanksgiving for all.
Thanks again to Dan Gilman. Always a great time to talk to Dan. You can find him all over streaming platforms. He might be doing a baseball game one week and a basketball game the next week. He's hustling, and we respect it. Moving into rotation 6, Nebraska is going to close the season on the road on the East Coast this week with the big one on Friday. This is an early start, 4 p.m. So you're going to have Nebraska, Penn State volleyball before Nebraska, Iowa football coming up on Friday. This is the de facto Big Ten championship match. These teams have not played so far this year. If Nebraska wins, they're going to be the outright Big Ten champs. If Penn State wins, it means they're probably going to share the title with the Huskers as long as Nebraska beats Maryland on Saturday. Let's dive into Penn State first, Lincoln. This is a really, really good team. They're ranked number 3 in the country, 26-2 overall this season, 16-1 in the Big Ten, and that is before we factor in their Sunday afternoon match against Washington as we're recording this right now. Penn State plays really well at home. In Rec Hall this year, they're 14-0. Both of their losses have come on the road. They were swept on the road by both Pitt and Wisconsin, but they've got some big wins this year too. They beat Louisville back in September, and Louisville is one of the top 5 teams in the country. They went on the road and beat Kentucky in 5. Oh, did I have their ranking wrong? They're actually ranked number 4. Pardon me there. But Penn State is outstanding, and they have got the firepower, just like Wisconsin, to really turn it up against Nebraska. And we'll get into their individual players. But Lincoln, we were talking a little bit last night. There are some sort of cracks in the dam. It looked like maybe a little bit. If you're looking for signs of hope in this match for Penn State, they've been dropping some sets lately to teams that you would not expect a team of Penn State's caliber to be dropping sets against.
Yeah, to be fair to you, Jeff, they were ranked number 3 most of the season until they finally lost to Wisconsin a couple weeks ago too. But okay,
I can be wrong.
Yeah, it's all right. But they've dropped sets that they should. I mean, they lost a set to Yale at home. I mean, that was back in September as well. But they lost to Michigan State. They dropped a set to Maryland, Indiana. They went 5 sets. They were on the ropes at Ohio State about a month ago. They barely eked out of Pauley Pavilion. They went 5 sets against UCLA. They dropped a set to Iowa and Northwestern. That Iowa match was at home as well too. So it's not just struggling away from Rec Hall too. They dropped a set to, like I said, Iowa, Northwestern. They dropped another set to Maryland. So I don't know if they just get bored or just get kind of lackadaisical. And also we mentioned they lost to Wisconsin too. They got housed by Wisconsin. Wisconsin looked like they were in another class.
Wisconsin hit like 500 against them. Yeah, it was insane.
It was a beat down against them. But again, then they have matches like we talked about earlier too, where they've swept Purdue both matches, both quite easily. And then they also, like you mentioned, they swept Louisville earlier this year too. So I don't know if they get up for the big matches or they just play with their food a little bit against some of the lower tier Big Ten teams. So it's interesting to to see what they do. But they do have one of the best offenses in the Big Ten. They are hitting 289 for the year, and that is really led by Jess Mruzek. She's one of the contenders for Big Ten Player of the Year. She's averaging 4.3 kills per set, but unlike a lot of other teams, it's not just the Jess Mruzek show. It can be at times too, but she has a lot of other help. Cameron Hanna, who is in her second year at Penn State after transferring from Clemson, averages 3.55 kills per set too. And there's some familiar faces across the net too. Former Huskers Maggie Mendelson and Caroline Juravicius they're getting a lot more regular playing time. Juravicius she's been a little playing time has been a little more sporadic as of late. They've kind of switched up what they are doing at opposite, but they're both getting significant playing time and playing large roles in what Penn State's doing this year.
That's right. And we talked a lot coming into the Wisconsin match about Wisconsin's freshman setter, Charlie Furbringer. Penn State has a freshman setter that's every bit as good and maybe a little better than Furbringer. Their freshman, Izzy Stark, is second in the Big Ten in assists, just behind Bergen Riley. She might be the best freshman setter in the country. She was the number one overall recruit by prepvolleyball.com. I think Furbringer was the number one overall recruit by a different recruiting service, but she's very, very good. And as Dan Gilman, I'm sorry, say that again.
Yeah, one and number one and two, I think both services. So yeah.
And like Dan Gilman said, Rec Hall is not an easy place to play. I don't know what sort of Thanksgiving week is going to be like if not many students are going to be there at the match, but it seems like they always have a whiteout when they play Nebraska. It's always really loud. And we made brief mention earlier of Penn State coach Katie Schumacher-Cawley, who in October announced that she's battling breast cancer and has been going through treatments for that during the season. And so there is always a big emotional lift when Penn State plays Nebraska. The emotions are going to be dialed up to 11 for coach, for senior night, for the last match of the regular season and the Big Ten championship at stake. Nebraska's got to in the matches that they have struggled out in Happy Valley, it feels like they let Penn State go on big runs, and Penn State can side out with the best of them with Jess Mruzek and Cameron Hanna. Nebraska is going to have to serve tough, and probably tougher than they served Wisconsin on Saturday night, keep them off the net. And, Maggie Mendelson and Caroline Juravicius, I'm sure, would like nothing more than to have big matches against their former team. But, this is it right now. It's kind of a pressure-free match, I think, for Nebraska. They conquered Wisconsin twice. They know they're probably going to at least share the Big Ten championship. They're going to be a number one regional seed come next week. And now they can just kind of go out and play free and have a big test before the NCAA tournament starts.
Yeah. And the one area this maybe added pressure is that depending on what happens on Wednesday night between that Pitt-Louisville match, if Louisville wins, that really opens up the door for Nebraska to be the number one overall seed. I mean, they still could do it because Nebraska has an incredible resume, but the one pressure would be Nebraska needs to win to get that number one overall seed. I don't know how much that means to them, but it could mean something. And like you said, it'll be a crazy crowd. I mean, we'll see if the men's volleyball team is usually there in the front row with their Thompson chance. But props to Grace McNamara and the Big Ten schedule makers who put this one in the last week of the season. Usually this spot's been kind of reserved for Nebraska, Wisconsin in the past several years, but they put that the Saturday before, and I don't know if they had a hunch, but knew that this would be the most consequential. This is Penn State's last match of the year as well, regular season, because they play Sunday, Wednesday, Friday. So very compact schedule. A lot of that is at home though, so they're not traveling, but they get 3 matches in the span of 5 days. And that's a lot heavy load to do in the Big Ten.
Who are your most likely candidates to be the 5 and the 6 overall seed? It's probably Penn State if Nebraska wins on Friday, right? And then you're also looking at
Stanford. I think
Stanford,
Creighton, Stanford. I mean, assuming that, I think Louisville will be 3, and then 4 will be Creighton, Penn State, Stanford, and I mean, because then after that, Wisconsin's not going to move up, and then Purdue's not going to move up. Arizona State, I think, is in the class, so I think it's 5-6 is going to be.
The reason I ask is because no matter whether you're the 1 or the 2 seed, you're going to get a really good team in that Elite 8 draw. So what you could see is if Nebraska is the number 1 overall seed, you could see them faced up against Creighton in the Elite Eight. It'll be like a Creighton or a Stanford level team. Odds are it's going to be a team. Nebraska.
That's the Final Four matchup. If
you think Final Four matchup?
Well, if Creighton's a 4 or 5, that'd be a Final Four matchup.
Well, I'm thinking like the 1-5 or the 2-6 match in the Elite Eight.
No,
am I doing this backwards?
It'd be 1-8, 2-7.
Okay, that's right. My bad.
So you could see a Wisconsin or a Texas or Arizona State. I think is the most likely Elite Eight matchup for the Huskers. You're around ahead.
Okay. My bad. Well, hey, before I trip over my tongue anymore, let's move on to the second match that Nebraska is going to play this weekend. They're going to close the regular season on Saturday at Maryland I think they're playing this in the larger arena, the Xfinity Center. Right next door to where Maryland plays most of their home matches. Maryland's not having a great year, 13-16 overall. They've always kind of been around 500 since Adam Hughes took over as head coach. He's been there 7 years now. I remember when he was hired. This makes me feel old. I didn't think he'd been there that long. Maryland is 4-14 in Big Ten play this year. They actually get to play Rutgers on Friday night and then turn around and play Nebraska the next night. So best wins that Maryland has this year, they actually beat UCLA at home. When UCLA had to travel across the country. They have a win over Ohio State. There was a stretch there in early November where Maryland won 3 straight. I think they beat Michigan State in their other match in that stretch, but now the Terrapins have lost three in a row going into this week. Maryland, nothing really jumps out to you about them except for one facet of the game, which is serving. Maryland can serve you off the court if you let them. They lead the Big Ten in aces. The team averages 2 aces per set. And a lot of that comes from their outside hitter, Samantha Ncaa, who transferred in this year from Ole Miss and has become their best player. Ncaa leads the Big Ten in aces by a fairly significant margin. She has 81 aces on the year, 21 more than the next highest player, which I believe is Valentina Valette from Michigan. In her last 4 matches, Ncaa has 14 aces, including 7 aces against Ohio State. She also leads them in kills at 3.4 kills a set. So Maryland is not a team that, you're really afraid of, but, if you let them get hot from the service line and all of a sudden you're down 19-17 in a set, like they can give you some problems.
Yeah. And I think that's where Nebraska has to feel good because Nebraska do really well serve receive. So Nebraska will employ their littles and Harper Murray kind of back and serve receive and hopefully take care of business. The other name of note we'll mention, because she might have 10 years at Maryland as well too, is Sam Sire. She's a 5th year. She's been around a while, averaging 2.7 kills per set too. But again, another Big Ten road match for Nebraska. More than likely another Big Ten attendance record for the Huskers at another away venue. So like you said, they're playing in the main Xfinity Arena, which I think the record for that's only like 4,000. And there's a lot of Nebraska fans that live in
I was going to say, this is going to feel like a Nebraska home match. There's going to, everyone from all the alumni in like the DC, Maryland, Virginia area are going to come to that match. And it's going to, at best for Maryland, be a 50-50 crowd, I think.
It will be a very heavy Nebraska lean, I bet. So, so Nebraska has a chance to win another Big Ten title, go back to back this year. So we'll see how they do, and we'll be here to recap it for you as well as the bracket next week. We'll have a lot to break down.
I think we should just prepare people right now that it's going to be a long show next week, and it will probably come out maybe Monday, a day later because if the brackets come out Sunday evening, we're going to want to react to that and analyze that a little bit. So we might actually have the show out a little bit later for you next week, and it's going to be longer than normal, but we want to make it a good one and break down the bracket. So Selection Sunday will be next Sunday evening, I believe. Lincoln, tell them about the bracket challenge that you've set up. For us. This is how we know we finally arrived.
Yeah, ESPN is now offering a bracket challenge. You can test your wits, test your knowledge of volleyball, and fill out a bracket just like you do in March for the men's and women's basketball tournaments. ESPN now offers a volleyball one. I set up a Volleyball State group. We didn't talk about this, but I'm just going to do this. Whoever wins that, I'll get you some Volleyball State merch. So that'll be the prize to the winner. Maybe we'll get a couple of the top teams up there.
I bet we can get Hurrdat to chip in a gift card to the Hurrdat Sports Bar.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we'll do that. So make sure if you just search Volleyball State, it's open. The bracket hasn't even started, and there's already 60 some people signed up for that. So yeah, we're a very popular entity. So sign up for that. It doesn't cost anything, chance to win. And it's great to have, again, growing the volleyball community. This is another way to do it. So it's awesome to see that.
Can we rename the bracket the Volleyball Sickos bracket? Or turn a group?
Yes.
Excellent. You sickos, get in there and see how good you can do. Also, subscribe to and review the show if you haven't done it yet. We're on Blue Sky now. We're hoping to reach some of the Volleyball Sicko community that's there. You can find all your Volleyball State merch at hurrdatsports.com/shop. Your Justice for Liberos shirt, your Bald Set Spike shirts. I think my bracket entry team name is First Bald Side Out, so you can see
that's yours. Nice.
If you can beat us in the contest. You can also find us on all the social media platforms. You can find us at Volleyball Pod or email the show at volleyballstate@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at by Jeff Sheldon. Actually, I think on Blue Sky, I'm just Jeff Sheldon. I'm the only Jeff Sheldon on Blue Sky. So I was an early adopter there, I guess, even though the platform's been around for a year and a half. And Lincoln, where can they find you and all the great stuff that you're going to be working on this week?
Yes. Feel free to read all of my stuff at Huskers Illustrated. I just wrote my magazine feature about Kennedy Orr and Lexi Rodriguez that just dropped. Subscribe there. It's one of my better stories, I think, of the year too. I guess spend a little more time on that. But follow me on Twitter at Lincoln_VB. I'm on Threads. I'm on Blue Sky, and they don't allow underscores there, so I'm just Lincoln VB. But yeah, find us wherever you want. I'm in the backer group as Lincoln Logs. That's my fantasy sports name. So logs roll. But yeah, that's all we got for today. Thanks to Cam Broham for producing today's show. Thanks to Hurrdat Sports. Find them also on social media on YouTube. Watch them. They put great content wherever you can find them. And that's it for us this week. Thanks for living in the Volleyball State.